You can't motivate somebody else, at least not in this internally driven way. Our job is really more about storytelling, interpreting, learning, building bridges. And if we push too hard on somebody before they're ready, they may get angry and kind of walk away and be done with you, or it could disrupt the trust. And it's much harder to rebuild trust than to ever form it in the first place.
I think this is a very thin line between creating a good behavior versus creating an addiction to the product.
Don't notify people unnecessarily. So I think these adaptive approaches enabled by technology are going to grow increasingly important.
Welcome to Growth Mates. This is Kate Suma, Growth Advisor, previously Head of Growth Design at Mira. Here you can learn how companies like Dropbox, Adobe, Canva, Loom, and many more are building excellent products and growth culture. Get all episodes and a free playbook for growth teams on our brand new website, growthmates.club. Have you ever wondered why some people start using the product but never come back after the first session? The problem is that they can't easily uncover the value that your entire team has been working hard on. We created a course intending to help you design the most valuable onboarding experience. The course is filled with best practices we gathered from over 80 companies and frameworks that will help you uncover improvements in your onboarding, run user research, and create a fresh roadmap of new experiments. The new cohort starts already on 16th of September, and for dear listeners, we provide a discount of $100 with the promo code GrowthMates. I would like to interact with each participant directly, and this is why we are collecting a small group of only 20 seats. You can find the link in the episode description. I would appreciate if you can also share it with someone who can find this valuable. Hope to see you on the course.
Hello, Amy. Welcome to Growth Mates. I'm so happy to have you on the show today. It's honestly been one of the most long-awaited episodes for me. So happy to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Kate. Thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to talking to you, and been listening to episodes of Growth Mates in preparation, and really enjoying everything that I've learned through listening. So excited to be a guest today.
Oh my God, I very much appreciate that. And I think it's the first time when I have the person with academic PhD background, a book author on this show. And it's a big honor for me. So I've been also doing a little bit of research about your background. And I even encountered you because of the recommendation from one of the previous episodes. We were discussing with my ex-Mira colleagues the behavioral design as a topic. It was one of the first episodes, actually. And my ex-colleague mentioned your book, Engaged, on this episode. And then after several months, I finally found the time to check it out, and it's very, very comprehensive and holistic book. That is just fantastic, so I will recommend it to everyone. Finally, we have you on this show, so we will dive deeper into this topic of behavioral psychology, behavioral design. You will tell us what is that, because probably a lot of people just don't know what is that. And before we start, I like to start these conversations with just unpacking your personal growth story, because you have such an interesting trajectory from organizational psychology, behavioral science. Now you're Chief Behavioral Officer, which is super interesting title. I cannot imagine what is that. You're working at Lirio, which is a personalization engine for digital health, which is a great mission and company. And then you're an author of this book, Engaged. So can you tell us a bit more about your path and what led you to this interesting career where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. And I feel very lucky because early in my career, I did not know what I wanted or what I was doing. I just made the best choice I had available to me at the time. And I was lucky that because there's certain themes that I've always been interested in, that best choice sort of added up to a pattern and let me ultimately, I'm doing my dream job right now. So I do feel very lucky that my life experiences have added up to let me do that. But I studied psychology as an undergraduate and really loved it, and felt like I could not get a job doing psychology unless I went to graduate school, because I wasn't studying clinical psychology. I wasn't equipped to go into kind of a health delivery context. So went to graduate school, and PhD programs, or at least the one I went to, really prepares you to be an academic, to go get a university professorship. And I kind of knew that was not what I wanted to do, but I didn't know what else was available. And when I asked people, nobody really had good advice for me. I graduated in 2006, and that was really before the job I do now really existed. There were very few people who were applying behavioral science to designing digital products at that time. So I, looked for jobs, not knowing what kind of job I was really capable of doing, and was very lucky that early in my career, I landed a job working on a digital product for an organization called Health Media that was doing personalization of behavioral science content to help people with all kinds of health behaviors. So we had things around weight management and sleeping better and managing, depression and anxiety and those kinds of things. And it was an incredible career opportunity. And it's really where I learned how you do behavioral design. How do you apply behavioral science and psychology to creating a digital product that is engaging for people and actually helps them make change in their real life? Once I had that job, my path became a little bit clearer. I really think that was the place where I discovered what I wanted to do, was meant to do. And so my subsequent jobs, I was always looking for something that was in a digital design space, part of a product team or contributing to a product team, and applying that behavioral science. And so, worked for CVS Health for a little bit of time in their digital innovation space. I worked for an agency, a strategic design agency called Appcues as a consultant in a practice called behavior change design. So really getting to use those skills with clients. And that was around when I wrote my book. And the reason for that was the more I worked in this space, the more I was encountering what I'll call UXers, or, people who you might think of more traditionally when you think of design. And a lot of them were saying to me like, wow, it's really interesting how you apply behavioral science to the design work that you do. Where do you learn to do that? Like where are the books? Where are the resources that will teach me to do that? And I found that there was not any one resource I could point people to. So I felt like there was an opportunity for me to write that resource. So my book was really written for that audience, for people who are UXers or designers and they want to learn a little bit of behavioral science to bring it into their craft. And, after I wrote the book, I ended up leaving MadPow and joining Lirio. I was at first leading our behavioral design team and then was promoted at about 8 months in to be the chief behavioral officer. So now I oversee both behavioral design and behavioral research. And it's really, to me, felt like the natural endpoint of what I was doing all those years ago at Health Media, because we were using technology to personalize the way we deliver behavioral science. But this was before AI was nearly as sophisticated as it is. So we were handwriting algorithms, we were, hard coding decision rules, and doing, I think, really sophisticated work. I think the work we were doing 15 years ago would actually still stand up today and be something that I would feel proud of. But at Lirio, we're applying AI to do that sort of work. And it allows us to really take advantage of very deep and complex data sets that we couldn't have done with those previous technology approaches. So I feel like I've been given this gift of I'm using a much more sophisticated technology tool set to do the work that I've been doing now for 15 plus years. So that's kind of how it all came to be.
Wow, thank you very much for this story. And I would like to dive into each element of that, but we will not have time for that today. However, what I'd like to do is to dive deeper into some elements of your book where I found like very interesting concepts, interesting frameworks that I would like to make more available for our listeners and other people who will listen to that. But before we start, maybe you could give your simple definition of behavioral design, because there probably people are familiar with user experience design, I don't know, user interface, etc., digital design, but what is behavioral design?
This episode is brought to you by Appcues, the platform that helps you design, deploy, and test captivating onboarding experiences in minutes, not weeks. Appcues created the Product Adoption Academy, which includes courses, templates, and examples to help you level up your product adoption, and you can use it entirely for free. Check out the 5-step growth flow review template, which I created to help companies connect growth hypotheses with behavioral patterns to uncover meaningful improvements. Find an example of Dropbox Onboarding inside and use this template to review any growth flows in your product. Get the template through the link appcues.com/growthmate.
Yeah, so it's specifically intended to change people's behaviors. And so we start by defining what behaviors it is that we hope to affect. That's a really important part of our process. And then that becomes the centerpiece of all of the research that we do and all of the design that we do is why are people doing this behavior or not doing this behavior? What techniques can we use to influence those reasons for doing the behavior or not? And then how do those techniques actually show up in a design? If we're writing content, what are the words that express those techniques? We use visuals to communicate those techniques. Sometimes it's functionality, it's more interaction design. What does the tool need to do? And when I say techniques, it might be something like goal setting or instruction on how to perform a behavior. And you can imagine there's all kinds of different ways to bring design tools to bear to actually operationalize those tactics. I've also used a metaphor in the past that behavioral design is a little bit like a pair of sunglasses that you can put over another design discipline, because we do UX research, we do UX design, and we're just doing those things with a slightly different lens, which is we're always focused on that behavior and the reasons that behavior happens or doesn't happen.
Wow, I love this metaphor. It makes it so much easier to understand, because for me, it was also like a lens. I called like, let's look at that through the lens of behavioral principles, right? And I like that you are combining it in your work. So I can imagine that this type of work is more relevant for products that are driving behavioral change. Like an example of Zoe as a product is coming to my mind, the product that is driving healthy nutrition, like based habits, or any habit forming or like habit changing platform. However, we are all building habits in our even digital B2B SaaS products. And you have an interesting framework in your book, which is called Behavior Change Wheel framework. And it has 3 components, as far as I remember: capability, opportunity, and motivation. So you suggest us to think through all of these elements. And can you give us a bit more explanation about these 3 elements and maybe some examples how the product can think about them while designing this behavioral change?
Definitely. So first, I should say I did not invent this framework. The Behavior Change Wheel comes from the University College of London. There's a very active research community at UCL led by Dr. Susan Mickey, Dr. Robert West, and a few others who have really created this framework and then continued to add research and knowledge to it, evolve it over time. And that's actually one of the reasons I do use it. I tend to gravitate towards tools where there is active research happening and a lot of evidence about how that tool works and doesn't work, because that to me feels like a less risky choice, right? We know that there's data that shows us that this approach works and how it works. So when the team started building this framework, they actually looked at something like 1,200 studies of behavior change, and they were trying to create a taxonomy of what's happening in these studies. And they came up with this idea that for a behavior to happen, a person has to have the capability, the opportunity, and the motivation to do it. So there's a subset of COMBEE, or a subset of behavior change wheel called COMBEE, and it's that acronym for capability, opportunity, motivation equals behavior. And what I love about it is it provides us this lens when we're analyzing what is causing a behavior to happen or not. We look at capability, which is the person's ability to perform the behavior. And that can either be their physical ability or it could be a psychological ability. Like, do they understand how they do it? Or if it's a complex multi-part behavior, can they behaviorally regulate to do all of those parts in order? Or is it something where they need, tutorials and an instruction list, which is a different design challenge? Opportunity is about the environment where the behavior happens. And that can be either the physical environment, or even things, if you think about traditional UX research, a lot of times we're doing things like usability testing. The design of a website or a digital tool is part of the physical environment. And then it can also be the social environment, because we're very influenced by other people. And sometimes if we're in a place where a behavior might be looked at as strange or unacceptable, we're far, far less likely to do it. So we need to consider the social environment for the behavior. And then finally, motivation also has 2 parts. One of them is, I think, what people always think of, which is this a goal for a person? Do they value it? Do they want to do it? And I will point out here that a second piece of that is we're not driven by any one goal at any one time. So we all have lots of goals. I want to have a great conversation with you, but I also, have other goals that might compete with that. And so it's goal priority. Does this goal for the person actually take priority over other things they could be doing instead? And then the second piece there is also, is this something that make sense to them in sort of an implicit way. So if you think about cultural values or mental models of how a behavior works, that's something that's part of motivation in this framework as well. And you'll see this sometimes with like cross-cultural things. Like I work in healthcare, and sometimes we will work with patients who come from cultures where it might be considered immodest to have certain types of exams like a mammogram. And so that's a type of automatic motivation where the person may not even be able to articulate to you like, oh, I feel strange about this because I grew up in an environment where this would be considered an immodest behavior. But ultimately, that is the root cause of their reluctance to have that cancer screening, and it's something we'll have to deal with if we actually want to get them to do the behavior.
Interesting. I love that we ended up discussing motivations and goal setting, because I think it's very relevant to even like SaaS products and any like B2B, B2C products. This is how we start onboarding our users. We are asking them about their goals, why you are coming to this app, what you want to get out of it. However, I see that sometimes people who are working on these products, they don't understand the difference between different types of motivations, and sometimes not able to drive this internal motivation. So how do you think we can better drive the motivation, thinking of this internal motivation versus external artificial triggers to drive probably not natural behavior?
Yeah, there's an important thing from psychology that I say a lot, and I'm always reminding even myself of, which is you can't motivate somebody else, at least not in this internally driven way, because internal motivation relies on a person's goals for themselves and their values and their identity, and we can't really impose those things on someone else. So our job is really more about storytelling, interpreting, learning, building bridges. And I actually find, as challenging as that is, it's a more inspiring way to think about product development. So when I'm designing something and I really want to tap into people's internal motivation, first of all, there is that discovery component. Can I gather data that will tell me what they value, and then help them understand how the behaviors that we're nudging or trying to promote might actually support those values and goals that they have. So, in healthcare, it's hard, but a thing that makes it easier is that we know that there are certain universal human values, things that people by and large do care about. And those are things like family. Most people have loved ones that they really want to enjoy and be there for. It often includes things like professional accomplishment and involvement in the community. And if we can make an argument that, hey, if you do these things to be healthier, they will actually ultimately help you be, more present with your family, or engage in activities that you love, or be more effective at your job. Those are ways that we can help kindle that internal motivation, because we're helping people realize like, oh, even though it didn't seem super related to like go get my flu vaccine, actually this is going to give me some confidence that, I can spend time with my loved ones this autumn and not, create any risk or miss days with my family because I'm super sick when I could have had a milder form of the illness. So it's a little bit of storytelling that has to happen there. And I mean, the other piece of it that sometimes happens is people don't feel that it aligns with their goals. And so there's another important piece in psychology that we don't push it too hard, because people change over time. We have experiences that change our attitudes and our willingness to do something. And if we push too hard on somebody before they're ready, they may get angry and kind of walk away and be done with you, or it could disrupt the trust. And it's much harder to rebuild trust than to ever form it in the first place. And so when we encounter somebody who really doesn't want to do something, it's important that we say, okay, that's fine. But if you're ever ready, we're here. And we can try again, a couple months later, a couple years later, whenever the time is right. But if we push too hard in the moment, we really run the risk of losing them long term. And that's a bad thing.
Absolutely. And this is one of the themes that I think I've been observing a lot, even like doing a lot of work on the growth funnel. You're trying to optimize so many things. And in the end, a lot of products become overwhelmed with notifications. So we have notification for everything. You need to do that. You need to look at that. You will receive this email about that. And users are just bombarded with notifications, and it becomes just a dark pattern in the end. So an example that came to my mind recently is LeetCode. There is a product that has a very good mission, actually, to help developers prepare for certain interviews with algorithms. And they have a gamification system there, which is quite familiar with like streaks and leaderboards and all of these mechanics. However, my husband is using it right now, and I noticed that it becomes a pattern of just practicing for the sake of practicing, I just want this achievement. I just want to close this day. I want to have a streak. I want to have that and that. And when I'm asking, like, will it actually help you get better prepared? There is no such a straightforward answer anymore. It becomes like an addiction even. And I think this is a very thin line between like creating a good behavior versus like creating an addiction to the product. And there is a natural frequency that we should consider and take into account, of course, to be ethical about that. So if you have anything to share about that, I can imagine you have a lot of thoughts. Yeah.
Oh, I feel like we could talk just about this. When I worked at Health Media, one of the things that we talked a lot about that was very formative to me, because again, that was early in my career. But we would have clients who would say, well, and how often do people come back and continue to engage? And we would always say, we don't necessarily need them to do that. So if we provide them with digital health coaching that's around managing their hypertension, and they complete the coaching module and they're making lifestyle changes and they're going to the doctor and their hypertension is improving, we do not need them visiting the coaching module over and over again. They've gotten the value out of it. They've done what we needed them to do, and it's achieved its purpose. And so I do think very much in terms of like graduating people. And again, with behavioral design, it's all about the behaviors. So if somebody has mastered a behavior and they don't need our support anymore to do that behavior, then they don't need our product right now for this purpose, at least. And maybe it's just that they're no longer part of our audience, or maybe it's we're offering them a different product that's right for something else they're struggling with. There's an approach in behavioral science that's relatively new that we're starting to work on at Lirio called just-in-time adaptive interventions, or JIDI, which sounds sort of like Jedi and Star Wars. So I like using the little Star Wars, here's my Jedi Yoda helping people with behavior. But the idea with JIDI is that you deliver people support only in the amount they need it. And so it relies on having data. Like this is something that's a very technology-enabled approach to behavior change. But if you think about something like having a movement tracker or even a food diary, anything that can sort of tell you in the moment what a person's doing, if you need to remind people about a behavior, but they're doing it, you don't need to remind them about the behavior. So you're monitoring that data. And the other piece of it is this just in time. So you also want to give people nudges or prompts in the moment where they can take action on it. So if you're taking a daily medication and I've built a product that's supposed to support you in that, I would want to send you the reminder at the time you're supposed to take the medication, not 2 hours before and not 2 hours after. And if you've gotten really good, if you've taken that medication successfully the last 14 days in a row, maybe I skip a day and see if you still do it. Because what you mentioned with all the notifications, there's a term in healthcare called alarm fatigue, and it came from doctors and nurses being in the patient rooms, and there's so many things that are beeping and making noise that ultimately they ignore all of them, which is bad because some of those noises have meaning that should be paid attention to. And so when we design, we also want to avoid alarm fatigue, and that means we don't notify people unnecessarily. So I think these adaptive approaches enabled by technology are going to grow increasingly important. And especially because, we're all carrying supercomputers in our pockets now, and we're using, our smartphones for all kinds of different purposes. And so the number and type of alerts that we're getting is so much that, it's important to make sure that if you own a product, the alerts that you're sending are really well defined and they can break through that noise, because your users learn that you're only going to notify them when it's truly important.
Yeah, I love that we landed on this example of alarms, because it reminded me of some other study I was listening to about like our even like hormonal reaction to any alarm type of notifications. Like from the ancient times, people were like triggered by things like, I don't know, tiger is running to you and you got this cortisol and like all of these hormone reactions, which creates like this sense of this feeling. And now we are getting the same or almost the same chemical reaction to the things like alarm from my messenger.
Yes.
But it's not a tiger.
No, and it's so dysfunctional, right? It's not good for our bodies to be subjected to these bursts of stress that aren't necessary, right? Like these things had a meaning originally. We didn't want to get eaten by the tiger, but like the messenger isn't going to eat us.
Oh yeah. Let's be a little bit more careful with our users and don't trigger them too much. And another theme that I wanted to talk to you about before we go to the part of how to apply this behavioral design, which we already started talking about, but like a little bit more theory before the practice. I really like the 3 types of psychological needs that you explained in your book, which is very simple to get: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. I think there are more, but I think these three already cover a lot of scenarios. And I would say it would be valuable maybe to discuss each of them separately and how some products are using these needs to drive a positive behavior change. So we can start with the autonomy if you have an example of that and a product who is trying to drive this need.
Yeah, definitely. And these three, by the way, also come from an established theory called self-determination theory of motivation. Another one, it's been around about 45 years, really active research community centered at the University of Rochester in New York in the US. And again, that always gives me confidence when you see a group of amazing researchers who have devoted their lives to something and are continuing to generate new knowledge around it. And so they have found using this framework that there are really only 3 basic psychological needs. And if you can fulfill them, if you can give people support for those, then they stay engaged with an experience. And that experience can be something like behaviors, which is really important. You know, if you want to set people on a healthier lifestyle, this is a way to do it. So autonomy is really about people feeling a sense of control over their own destiny. It's about giving people meaningful choices to make. The word meaningful is really important there. So I think sometimes as designers, it's very tempting to give people, you know, full personalization control over an experience. You can make the background whatever color you want and change the font and, you know, name your avatar, whatever you like. And those kinds of things can be fun and cool, but they're not really checking the box for autonomy. Autonomy would be more like setting your own goal. So, you know, I'm joining this app or this program, and the reason I'm doing it is because I want to be able to bench press 100 pounds, or I want to be able to run a 10K race. If you can put that sort of more meaningful framework around your own experience, it's really motivating for people. And, you know, I mentioned to you before that one of the products that I think does a really nice job with that is Peloton. I do use Peloton, so I'm very familiar with all of the different ways that it supports autonomy, but it gives you a lot of choice within a framework. And maybe that's an important piece of it. It's like giving people curated or guided choices. So as product designers, we often have some expertise in the area that we're designing around. And so we can provide people with some boundaries or rules to work within, but where we can give them choices inside of those boundaries, that's where we can get some of this motivation. So with Peloton, you know, it's an exercise platform. They have different equipment. I own the bike, but I actually use the strength training, and they do an outdoor program too. So if I go for like a run or a walk outside, I'll often put on the audio for those workouts, and they'll coach you through your earphones to, you know, okay, pick up the pace, and like now we're going to recover. And what I like about Peloton in terms of autonomy support is, first of all, you do get to choose within the framework of physical activity, like what does that mean for you? What are the physical activities that you want to do? You're not restricted, you know, just because I own the bike doesn't mean I only can do bike workouts. I can also choose to do those outdoor workouts. Or if I visit someone who owns another piece of Peloton equipment, it's very easy for me to just use that through my account. And all of those activities count towards the way that they measure your engagement and your success. So like many apps, they do streaks. And I think Peloton is a great example of an app that does forgiving streaks, where they measure both your daily streak, but then your weekly streak. So you can still sort of be rewarded for consistency, which is super important for exercise, even if you don't do it every single day. And that's fantastic because it's really hard to do anything every single day. And especially something like exercising. First of all, people are supposed to take rest days for recovery. So there's kind of a built-in reason why a daily streak might not always make sense. But secondly, you know, if you're traveling, if you're sick, like there's all kinds of reasons why you might not be able to continue a daily streak, and giving people the opportunity to choose what it means to show up consistently supports that sense of autonomy. And I think ultimately helps people stay more engaged over longer periods of time.
Yeah, well, I love this. I would like to explore the product and maybe create a breakdown of these practices. It sounds like it's a very good example. I can maybe cover the other two, like competence and relatedness. So as for competence, I was thinking of course, Duolingo, which has good and not so good parts in it. But I think it's maybe like it's a good example because it's created around the mission or idea to help you become a better like speaker in certain language and just be more competent. And it's probably a better element for any educational apps or like products that drive some formats of education. However, I think we need to figure out the healthy boundaries. So are we comparing you with yourself and your version yesterday and you become better version today than you've been yesterday, versus we are comparing you with the group, and are we comparing you with the relevant group or not? So I think this element is very tricky and not so easy to measure and define in a good way. as well as these notifications, right? So I think there is a room for improvement for Duolingo as a product in terms of like relevant and timely notifications. And as for relatedness, I was thinking that maybe it's connected to this idea of community-led growth or being a sense of the community, right? So how do you define the relatedness as a need?
Yeah, relatedness is an interesting one because I think it's very easy for product people to say, and this is getting better, but at least a couple years ago, oh, let's add a social component to our product. We'll let people post on Facebook that they completed, lesson 12 in Duolingo. It's not necessarily about direct social connection, although that can help people feel relatedness. It's really about feeling a sense of belonging. Nobody wants to feel like they're the only person on earth experiencing something. Like we get a lot of value out of knowing that our experiences are shared, that, we're not one of a kind, even though, we value uniqueness to some extent, but ultimately we're a very social species. And so we can do things like using normative feedback to, let people know that others are also doing similar things or experiencing similar things. Even on like Duolingo, they have some of the little competitive things where, you can see how many points you've earned on a leaderboard against others that you're connected with. And those sorts of things can also help with relatedness, not necessarily because of the competition aspect, but because you can see that other people are also, engaging with this product and, to what extent you can kind of imagine that they're similar to you. And that goes a long way.
Yeah, I love it. So, and I think as a result, if the product is creating just great experience and delivering value, there is a community around this product, like organic word of mouth. And I noticed that from our bubble of products that in our product-led growth community we are talking about, Notion stands out because they have a huge Reddit community. They have like enormously bigger community than any other product has, and it's naturally created. So there is like, I think, 350K Reddit users for such a product, which seems like people want to be related to that. So a lot of people just come in and use Notion, and I'm using it right now for my note just because I know others are using it and I just trust them and I just joined this bubble. And I think it's an interesting thing to work on, but it's a long time game. So like it takes an effort to create such an experience. And before, like, finally, I think it's a good moment to transition into the part of applying some of the things we have discussed with you to the reality of building digital products. We also took some examples already. So I would maybe first explain that in growth, we are talking a lot about building habits. So this is a very typical situation. And also it's the final phase of activation process. So activation has 3 phases like setup moment, aha moment, and habit forming. And for habit forming, I think the whole industry is very familiar with near AL framework, trigger action, reward investment. But in addition to that, what I found in your book and what I really liked is the suggestion to write the outcomes story. And can you give an example of such an outcome story, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so this is actually, I think, a really important thing of being a behavioral scientist in a business context, because if I can't design a behavioral experience that supports a business need, then I don't have a job. So it's really about starting with what are you hoping to achieve with this product from a sort of business success standpoint. We're working with a client right now in my work at Lirio where they are very interested in reducing unnecessary usage of the emergency department. So that's something that's very expensive for them. It doesn't allow them to kind of control the supply and demand of care. And what they're seeing is people show up to the emergency department for things that could be treated by a primary care physician. You could make an appointment and go in. It's not really an emergency. And then they're in this situation where there are people who really do have emergencies. They cut a finger off cooking dinner. They're in a crowded emergency room because there's people there who have a sore throat or, want to talk about a funny spot on their skin that they noticed 3 weeks ago. So the business outcome for them is going to be they want to see fewer people in the emergency department whose problems could have been treated through a planned appointment. And once we understand that, we can start to map backwards and say, okay, what are the behaviors that are happening that are leading to the undesired outcome? What behaviors need to happen to lead to the desired outcome? And some of the behaviors that need to happen for the desired outcome are, first of all, people people have to have a doctor to call. And that is a big problem. A lot of people don't have doctors assigned to them. And so when they get sick, they honestly just don't know where to go. And the emergency department makes logical sense. They have access to it. And so that's what they choose. So one of the behaviors that we can help with is getting people to actually go online, look at the list of available doctors, pick one, and either make a phone call or click through online and affiliate with that doctor. So now in the future, they have a person they can call when they don't feel well. And then the second piece is actually getting them to make that phone call or go online and make the appointment when they have something arise that they might otherwise have gone to the emergency department for. Now, if we hadn't started with this is what the outcome is, this is what success looks like, I don't know that we would have identified the particular behaviors or even really understood what the problem space is. But when our client comes to us and says, I'm going to feel like this was a success 6 months from now if we're seeing a percentage reduction in the people who are coming to the emergency department with these types of problems, now that becomes something that we can solve for. So it's putting some definition around it. It's creating those success metrics up front. And it's really ensuring that what we design is most likely to achieve the outcome.
Oh, I really love this example. It reminded me of my framework that I co-created with colleagues, and like through experience of like thinking of the user problem, then hypothesis, then what success looks like, but in the reverse engineered format. So first we need to define what success looks like, and then like identify other elements but what I really think is different from the approach that you're explaining, you're not saying user problems or initiative or solution, you're talking a lot about behaviors, which I think is a bit more complex description of what is happening with the user. Because whenever I'm looking at the roadmap of the product team, I see very, very concise and short definitions of like, this is the problem, this is the solution. And sometimes the problem doesn't have any explanation about the actual behavior, or as you've said, behaviors that can block users from something and behaviors that should drive them to desired outcomes. There are different things to consider here. And this is something I would like to maybe remind to our product community. Let's start thinking about behaviors, not just pure problems, needs, or even solutions per se, because sometimes I would say I've seen situations when there is a business goal and solution. That's it. Business goal, solution, nothing in between, which is crazy. Another chapter that you had, maybe it's connected to this outcomes story, but you had a chapter which is called Designing for Growth. And of course, I took a look at that because it's something I've been doing for a very long time. And you are explaining a lot of different elements there. It's also step-by-step approach that you can like design an experience, motivate growth, and do different tactics or like principles for that. So one of them was to think of progress over perfection and to think of milestones and celebrating users through these milestones while we are designing such an experience for growth. So can you tell a bit more about that principle maybe?
Yeah, well, and, I'm really thinking about individual growth in this sense, but, and I know that you've often focused more on like product or organizational growth, but I think they're really connected, because if we have a product and we're not helping the people who use it feel growth, which is one of those, basic psychological needs, competence, we want to feel like we're growing through our experience, then, the product won't grow and the company won't grow. So it's all connected to me. But I think a lot of our job is really making a complex journey easier for people. And, again, I work in healthcare. So the things that I'm often trying to help people do are huge, sometimes lifelong undertakings. If you have diabetes, you may be managing your diabetes for the rest of your life. And every day that's a set of many behaviors that you have to do a certain way, from medication and measuring your blood sugar and eating and exercising. And, if you get a cold or get sick, that changes the other things that you do to manage your diabetes. So not easy by any means. And if you have someone with a new diagnosis and you just give them a list of everything they need to do, it's overwhelming. They don't know where to start, and they're not likely to be successful. So a lot of designing for growth is really taking those very complex, either sets of behaviors, or sometimes it's a complex single behavior. So we've talked a little bit about Duolingo and learning a language. They do an awesome job taking this big idea of like learning a language and breaking it down into very achievable, logical steps. Like they do a nice job patterning them in a way where if you start with lesson 1 and you go to lesson 2, it makes sense why they were ordered that way. And similarly with health, to go back to that example of diabetes, you might start with a couple of behaviors from that laundry list that are most important. If you do these two things, you will have a good start. And that's where you focus to start. You're not saying like these other behaviors aren't important, but you're saying, let's really master behavior 1 and behavior 2 before we move on to behaviors 3 through 7. And that's really helpful to people. It also taps into a psychological construct called self-efficacy, which is this belief in your own ability to do something. Another very old theory, by the way. So I love my oldies. But one of the things that we find with self-efficacy is if we can notch up a quick win for somebody, if we can help them achieve something that feels really meaningful and good very early in their experience, we can use that as momentum to get them to try something that's even more challenging. So I always think of that when I'm designing for growth, like how can I give this person a quick win, a sense of success very early? And then I can keep talking about it with them. Like, wow, you did a great job, setting up all of your equipment to test your blood sugar and learning how to do that. Let's build on that and do the next thing.
Oh, I love it. I really love this example of quick win. I've been recently sharing quick win as like prioritization framework. At the same time, quick win is about the aha moment. So aha moment in the product, your first time of experiencing the core value. And sometimes I've seen companies are misunderstanding the concept of aha moment. They're just putting confetti everywhere. It's not about that. So if we just throw confetti in front of a user every single time when they're opening the app, it will not be perceived as something valuable, right? So I haven't done anything and there is a confetti right away. So there should be something like connected to the desired outcomes of the user, to these motivations or psychological needs. So they achieved something and we celebrated that. And that requires a deeper understanding of your customer in the end. So it's not about the design solutions or confettis, please. And I also remember that you mentioned their flow state, which I really like. I don't know how to package it in terms of like for the business goals, but it feels like it's the right thing to think about. So after this initial first steps, baby steps, quick wins, we should figure out how to make this whole experience pleasurable. Maybe Duolingo is also a good example because I remember when I've been using it for my Dutch practice, it was pleasurable to open this app, to sit down in my calm environment just for 10 minutes, just to practice it. And I think the idea of creating a flow out of this experience that should be not complex, should be pleasurable, is the end goal of any engaging experience, right?
Yeah. And I mean, a thing that I haven't explicitly said, but it's important to remember is people like to do things that are fun, that are pleasant. We're emotional creatures. And so if we can build this good feeling for people, that makes something, more enjoyable too. And people will be more engaged with it. And when you think about flow, some of it is creating something that's enjoyable for people, that meets their interests, makes them feel good. And some of it is about this idea of optimal challenge that is also part of growth, which is we get really bored when something is way too easy for us, and we get really frustrated if it's way too hard. There's kind of a middle ground where something is, we call it optimally challenging. So it takes effort to do, but it is achievable with work. And so if you look at a video game, a really good video game does a great job of that optimal challenge where, it will take some time and maybe you need to repeat a level several times before you actually finish it, but it's not impossible. And when you get people into these experiences where they have to work, but they can also see that this work will pay off, you get into this flow state. And we've all experienced flow states. So flow is basically when you lose track of time because you're so absorbed in your task. It just seems like the world around you disappears and it's just you and whatever you're doing. And it's a really fun thing to experience. Like I love when I realize I've been absorbed in a book or a video game or a conversation and, an hour has flown by. And I think it's even more fun to be able to create it for other people.
Oh yeah, that's an art of creating these experiences, I think. And before we jump to the final lightning round part, the last question that I think is useful for us to discuss here is the combination of AI and the world of behavioral science. So you've seen how these things impact each other. So how do you see companies now can benefit from using it as a tool to design even better behavioral change?
Yeah, I've learned a lot in my time at Lirio about AI because we have a full AI science team. So very lucky that I'm drinking from the fire hose, as they say, on my AI education. And one of the things that I've really taken to heart is that there's a lot of different flavors of AI and they all do slightly different things. So I think generative AI is probably what most people think of first, which is using a large language model or, other model to generate novel content or images. And there's a lot that you can do with that. What we do at Lirio is reinforcement learning, and it actually connects to a lot of what we've talked about today because it's a type of what we call objective-driven AI. So that outcome story, we use something like the outcome story to design the AI. We set the objective. What are we hoping to achieve? What is the outcome that we basically reward the algorithms to if they achieve it? And what's really cool about it is, those algorithms can be sensitive to multiple endpoints. So I have this thing in my book called an outcomes logic map. It starts with that, what is the big outcome that we're trying to achieve? What are the behaviors that we need to change? And what does that look like in order to get there? How do people need to interact with the product in order to make the behavior change? And then what's baseline? We can essentially program reinforcement learning for each of the points on that outcomes logic map. And we set rewards for the algorithm. They're just conceptual rewards. But basically, it's programmed to achieve those things. And so what we can say is, if you achieve the outcome, you get the very biggest reward. This is the most important thing. But we know we need people to interact with the product in order to get there. So we give it a smaller reward if it can engage people in the product itself. And what this allows us to do is basically personalize. We develop these really large libraries of behavioral science content. And because we've set up the algorithms the way that we have, they choose from that content what it thinks will be most effective first at engaging a person, but then at actually getting them to do whatever the health behavior is that we believe leads to the desired outcome. And so what I love about that is it lets us put some of the decisions about how we design and personalize an experience back on the data and on the technology. So it's not subject to human judgment about whether this is the right thing or the wrong thing for a person. We actually are using evidence. Like you may tell me that you love a certain type of outreach around your health, but if it's not actually getting you to take action, our system would figure that out pretty quick and be like, it doesn't matter what Kate says she likes. What actually works for her is this.
Wow. I really want to see more examples. Maybe in a year or a couple of years, there will be more apps that are using that as a tool so we could see how it works. Personalization these days is still, I would say, underdeveloped in many B2B SaaS products. We are talking of the importance of that during onboarding, during engaging experiences, but it's very hard to build this algorithm, as you said. So we are at the beginning of something new and something better, I think, than we have today. Yeah. So it's been fantastic conversation, Amy. Thank you so much. And before we jump off, just as a tradition, a lightning round of some questions. Don't take a lot of time for thinking. Just share what's coming to your mind. So the first one, what one type of behavior do you think our society lacks at the moment? My take on it, I would say at least 10 minutes meditations. I have my meditation pillow here. I think we would probably benefit from that. What's your take?
Yeah, well, I'm very bad at meditating, so you're not wrong there, at least for me. But I think the way that we consume information online and react to it is really broken. We don't take a lot of time to reflect if something is true or not, and we have these emotional reactions to things that we see. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of products that use AI and algorithms are set up to take advantage of that. So we know that emotionally polarizing information gets more engagement. And if your objective is to engage people with your product, then you're going to promote that polarizing information over others. So we've seen, I think there's been research that shows that if you're on Facebook, your news feed kind of reflects your existing political beliefs and will throw things in there that they know you're likely to react to. And I just notice a huge difference when I have a real life conversation with somebody and we don't agree on an issue. It is usually pretty civil and, friendly, and we exchange ideas and information. And even if I don't change my mind, I feel like, I've maybe learned something. I don't get that sense online. I think we've just become way too fast to react.
Yeah, wow. I would be glad if there would be some solution for that sometimes. So I'm not sitting a lot on different socials, but LinkedIn is my go-to because I have to be there. And sometimes
Yeah.
I just want to get away from it. I just want to close it. I just don't want to interact with that. But I don't think it should be like that. It should be a pleasurable platform for me. And it is, unless I'm opening a feed. So, all right, the next question I usually ask people about some resources or books that can give some inspiration on the topics that we discussed today. I think you have a huge list at the end of your book with like a million of resources, but maybe a couple of them that you'd like to highlight.
Sure. And these actually, I don't know if I highlighted these ones in my book or not, but one that I love, I've actually bought this for most people who work on my team at Lirio, is Behavioral Insights by Elspeth Kirkman and Michael Halsworth. So it's a short book, but it is a wonderful primer on behavioral design and the process that we use. And I think it's actually really funny as well. So I know the authors and I can see their humor shines through their writing. Another one is called Actionable Gamification by Yukai Chu. And, you mentioned gamification earlier. I think it's, again, like a very engaging book, fun to read, but also really creative in terms of how it uses gamification. And I think the scientific underpinnings of it are solid. On the AI side, I recently read and really liked this book called Power and Prediction by AJ Agrawal, Joshua Gans, and Avi Goldfarb. And what I liked about it was it really helped me understand some of the business context around using AI. It's not very technical. So I'm not very technical either. And I was able to understand the full book. And then I didn't have this on my list initially, but because you mentioned, things being really complex and maybe, needing to simplify experiences, there's a book called Subtract by Ladi Klotz that came out earlier this year. And that one was also very influential to me because it talks about people in design and product and really everybody, but that's my group that I focus on. We always have this inclination that we should be adding features, adding functionality, like let's do something more different for this new use case. But sometimes the best answer is actually to simplify and streamline. And we don't think of it. We're not trained to think of that. And so I've been kind of challenging myself recently in my own design work when I come up with, we didn't think of this, like, is there a way that we can actually simplify instead of complexifying in order to answer this challenge? And so that book is, I think, very helpful for people who want to think about that.
Oh, yeah, it will be in my list, definitely. And I also noticed that you shared in our show notes, preparation notes, that you're reading about 150 books per year.
Yes.
For me, this is like, wow, how are you managing to do that? Are you listening to them? Are you reading them just all the time?
Yeah. Well, so I do read a lot. I like every night, before bed, I read for a while to relax. I also travel a lot and I read on the airplane and that helps me. But it's also for fun. Like these are not academic books that I'm talking about. Like I love a beach read, like a trashy novel. I love murder mysteries and things like that. So part of it is I pick things that I enjoy that I get into that flow state. Yeah, it's always been a hobby of mine and it just works well for my lifestyle. I used to read even more when I commuted to work because I took a train and I had a place to sit and read for, half hour in the morning and the evening. So the work from home lifestyle is cut into my reading.
Wow, yeah. Like same thing. I used to read a lot before when I had this commute time, but now I'm just riding on a bike everywhere in Amsterdam. I cannot do that. But what I started doing way more is like listening to podcasts and of course. It's also very useful for me to create my own podcast just to get inspiration from other sources. And audio versions are also very handy sometimes for less academic and complex where I need to do a lot of highlights. Like in your book, I'm using Kindle for that. But I think it's another habit that a lot of people are trying to build. It's like a healthy habit. And I noticed that for me, like waking up earlier and reading in the morning and reading in the evening helps to stabilize it and making a healthy routine.
Yeah, I love if I am up early enough in the morning to actually sit upstairs and, have a cup of coffee and breakfast with some time. I love just reading, a chapter or two of my book then too, because it's quiet. It gives you a chance to sort of not be exposed to the news or your work email and get absorbed in a story.
Wow, this was a fantastic conversation, Amy. Thank you so much for joining today. I have so many notes, highlights. I feel like we can write an article and like just a breakdown and create so many pieces of this information to share in different sources. And it's been very, very valuable. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity and I've loved talking to you.
All right. Please continue doing what you are doing. So we all need more people, more like behavioral designers like you and like people who are in charge of that discipline. And maybe someday we will have these open positions in SaaS products soon. Why not? Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the show on growthmates.club and get free playbook with frameworks and insights. If you find this valuable, please share it with your friends and colleagues and subscribe to the show on your favorite platforms to get new episodes. Let's keep growing together.